the transition from Parshas Yisro to Parshas Mishpatim is powerful and perplexing. What I mean by that is the following. There is such a huge difference in terms of tone once we leave Har Sinai and we go to Parshas Mishpatim. Yisro was thunder and lightning and HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking and all of the miraculous events. Parshas Mishpatim is practical laws, one right after the other, after the other, after the other. It's what I would call a staccato parsha. In other words, you're going from one thing to the next. And the question, of course, is why that transition? And I think the answer is fairly obvious. And that is that Kadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us that the Torah is not, as we've said in other places, the Torah is not rooted at the mountain, at the top of the mountain, but rather rooted in the daily life of every individual. And therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, put aside now the thunder and the lightning. Now you're going to learn the essence. These are the laws that you have to obey. They will transform your life and your responsibility. However, the parsha then begins very strangely. Take a look at the first paragraph on page 1. Actually, yeah, page 1. Ve'ela mishpatim asher tosim lifnehem. And these are the statutes, the laws that you are to place before them. Right, so what would we think would be the first law that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would deal with? Shabbos, perhaps Yomim Tovim, perhaps Yohavta l'reacha kamocha, something lofty. Along comes the Torah and says, Ki sikne evred ivri, if you are to purchase and we'll actually translate it wrong now, but I'll do it the way the English translates it. If you purchase a Hebrew slave, 6 years shall he work. The 7th year, he's to go free. And then the Torah goes on to say that if the slave says, I'm comfortable, I like it here, I don't want to be out there, I want to be here, it's nice. And it's interesting. One of the things that I learned very quickly when I dealt with Russian young people who had come over from the Soviet Union is that democracy and freedom can be a little frightening if you're not used to it, because you're coming from a place where everything is done for you. Everything is decided basically for you. And now all of a sudden you have to make decisions. So this person doesn't want to go out. He wants to stay. So what do? A very famous paragraph. You take this individual to the doorpost, you pierce his ear, and he stays with you liolam, forever. But forever is only until Yovel, only until the Jubilee year. So take a look at the questions we have at the bottom. Why does the Torah begin with this set of laws? Again, this is a very critical moment. Kadosh Baruch Hu was introducing the statutes that are meant to be observed. There are very important laws that are found within this text. Why begin with this particular set of laws? What is the symbolism of the ritual that is performed on the slave? And what is the problem that is brought up by that ritual? And finally, what is really Eved Ivri? How do we translate it? And what is it as a concept? The last question, which of course is the major one, we're going to leave to the end, because we're not just going to deal with Eved Ivri. We're going to deal with a number of things. But let's just do the first 2 questions. Why would the Torah open Mishpatim with the laws concerning Avdus? Say again? Because we came out, right. In other words, so therefore, something we can relate to it. There is another answer as well. That's a terrific answer. But another answer as well, yes?
We were on Har Sinai and we proclaimed that we
That will tie into this slave who wants to stay, right? And Kodesh Baruch Hu is saying, Avodaihem, the Torah says, Velo Avodim, and then the rabbis add on, Velo Avodim la'avodim, right? You are my servants, but not servants to other men. But there's another possible reason, and that is when every society is defined by how it deals with the least fortunate. The least fortunate in the society are the ones that you've got to take care of and you've got to deal with. And how a society deals with those people is very important. And therefore, that's why you have Matanos Lo Evyonim on Purim. I'll throw it in there, because Matanos Lo Evyonim, gifts to the poor, the mitzvos of Purim are meant to build community. So therefore, what you have is you have the Mishpatim opening with Eved Ivri, because as we will see, an Eved Ivri is someone who is, he has ended up there because of unfortunate circumstances. And I have to take care. We have to deal with that person. Now, what's the symbolism of the ritual performed on the Eved? So I'm sorry, but what's your name?
Sterno.
Sure. I'm just want to tell you, Sharon, that this is the question, the issue you raised. What's the symbolism of the ritual performed on the Eved? Avodai, the ear that heard, the rabbis say. The ear that heard that you must be servants to God and not slaves to man, let that ear be pierced so that this individual knows he's making the wrong decision. Oh, but there's a problem with that. What's the problem with that? We heard all the mitzvos. Okay, but avodai, but this one relates to this. In other words, you shouldn't be, but there's a problem. Hashem doesn't say, keep kosher. And if you don't want to keep kosher, pierce your tongue, right? By the way, when I said that years ago, everybody went, it's not, unfortunately, it's, people do it, all right? But the point is that if God doesn't want you to do something, he commands you not to do it. Why is it that in this case, he's trying to discourage you, but not forbid it? So again, we don't know for sure, but I'll give you what I think is the answer. There's only one other case in the Torah where this is the approach of the Torah. The choice for freedom cannot be mandated. The choice for freedom has to be something that you realize on your own. If this slave has a slave mentality and I push him out the door, he's going to end up a slave to the neighbor, to somebody else. It has to be a decision that he makes, and only then will the decision last and take root. So that's one possibility, that we are only discouraging the individual as opposed to forbidding. Now let's go to the next page. If Eved Ivri is difficult to understand, the next page is even more difficult.
What was the other example?
I'm sorry?
What was the other example?
The other example is Eshes Yifas Toar, right? Where you capture a woman in battle and your Torah tries to convince you not to marry her, right? And again, I think the answer there is that has to be your decision rather than mandated. All right, so the next paragraph talks about Amma Ivriya, right? A Hebrew maid servant. And basically, if you look at the English and the Hebrew, what is happening here? A parent sells a daughter to someone as a maidservant. This daughter will marry when she comes of age, will marry the person who bought her, will marry the person that the owner of this slave. Right? However, she has a right. If he decides he doesn't want to marry her, he has to set her free. If he marries her, if she doesn't want it, many Mefarshim say she can refuse it. But that's the outline here. The outline is a parent sells a child as a servant to someone else, and the servant eventually has the ability to marry the owner, and the owner has to do that. And if he doesn't, then he has to let her go free. Okay, yes.
Talking about setting parameters for correct society. When I was young and I read this, I thought, oh, how terrible for a father to sell his daughter. And as I got older, I heard from different people that actually this was what Hashem wanted in terms of establishing more equality, that the poor should marry into the
Okay,
rich family.
we'll talk about that. All right, you took one of our punchlines away. All right, but what you're saying is that Hashem wants the poor to marry into the rich. So we'll talk about that. Right. And you solve and you solve the shidduch problem. All right, very good. All right, next, what I think is the most difficult of the three areas that we're going to study, and that is the issue of Eved Kanani. If you take a look on the bottom of page 2 and continuing on to page 3, you will see that the Torah talk says very clearly, let me just find it. Here we go. The Torah again reiterates, this is in Vayikra. Someone finds himself in a situation where financially he needs to sell, you can't work him. This is Eved Ivri. The paragraph opens with Eved Ivri. But then, if you go down to Mem Hey, or the next to last sentence in the English as well, I'm sorry, Mem Dalid, your slave and your maidservant who comes from the nations around you, you can work them hard and they will be your slave. And they are, in Memhe, you can take from the nations surrounding you. You can take individuals, you can buy individuals from the society in which you find yourself. And these individuals are then, since they belong to you, brought down, bequeathed to your children. So they will stay in the family forever, for years. Now,
It's amazing because they had the Dred Scott case.
What? Say again?
The Dred Scott case, and they said you couldn't do that in American.
Right. Interesting. Okay. But our question, of course, is how could this be? How could the Torah allow slavery? I think that's what we are now encountering, real slavery. Why doesn't the Torah simply say no? Okay, so let's now take a look at the three different ideas that we have, three different areas. But before we do that, just a couple of other quotes from the Torah that will help set the stage. And in Shmos it says, "V'kiyake ish es avdo es amoso b'shevet umeis tachas yodo nakom yinokem." If somebody hits or strikes his servant and that person dies, their death will be avenged. What does that mean? All right, we'll have to see. I'm on page 3 at the bottom of the page. Right? If he strikes, and I ask you what kind of slave this is referring to, is this an Eved Ivri? Is this an Eved Kanani? We'll get to that. Next, just bringing a couple of quotes about Avos. The next one is, Kiyake ish ein avdo o ein amaso. If a person strikes his slave or his maidservant, and she loses or he loses an eye or a tooth, that person must be set free. Okay? Set free. Set free. And finally, two more. Second paragraph, V'kidashtem es shnasa chamishim shana, you sanctify the 50th year, and that defines Li'olam by the Eved Ivri as the end of Jubilee year. Now, the Yovel year is something that we could study in depth. It's an amazing, amazing concept in terms of what it means for society, and what it means for the poor, and what it means for those who have been unfortunate. But one of the things that happens on Yovel is that avodim ivriim go free. And finally, the last one, which is really powerful, lo taskir eved el adonav asher yinotzel elecha me'im adonav imcha yeshev b'kirbecha v'al kol asher yivchar. Do not return a slave, a runaway slave. Don't turn him in. Don't give him back to his master. He should live with you and stay with you as a free person. Now, what is that referring to? Is that referring to Eved Knani, Eved Ivri? So let's take a look at all three of the different paragraphs we're dealing with, or concepts we're dealing with. The legal parameters, page number 5. 1, a result of theft or extreme poverty. Eved Ivri occurs only in one of two cases. If the individual steals and it is unable to pay back the value of the theft, then the court will sell him for that 6-year period or sell his services. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about the word Eved as it's used in the Torah. Eved does not mean slave. Eved means anything from a servant to a slave. It includes slavery, but an Eved Ivri is not a classical slave. Why not? Because you don't own him. You own his, what you own is you own his, what he produces. He's put himself in a position where everything he produces for that period of time goes to you. Right? And we'll see that that carries through to a very, very great extent. 2 is not owned. You don't own the Eved, you own his services. Yes?
There's such a difference between this service and the Eved Ivri and the classical slave. How come the Torah didn't find a term that would more appropriately describe
Excellent question. Excellent question. Why didn't the Torah find a term to if there's such a difference between this and the classical slave? I don't know. Perhaps because the Torah is saying, although this is not slavery, it's not something you should be doing. You should want as a slave, as a servant. But Eved Ivri, the best definition I can think of is an Eved Ivri is an indentured servant, where all of his produce, everything that he gets, everything he makes, everything he creates, during that period of time, doesn't belong to him, it belongs to you. Next. What? I'm sorry.
When the adult gives him a wife,
Well,
and Eved is when he sets free his wife and his children are not set
okay, we'll get there. All right. She asked the question, if he has a wife and the Eved is set free, the wife remains and he goes free. Not so simple. And children. It's not accurate. I'll tell you why. All right. There's a distinction between the wife he had and the shifcha that is given. Okay. All right. So let's go on. 6-year tenure. That's if sold by the court. If sold by the court, 6-year tenure, set free in the 7th. Self-sold flexible tenure. That means that if I'm so poor that I can't create or care for my family, what I do is I sell my services to someone, and I have a right to sell for a longer period of time than the 7 years. I can sell for 8 years, or I can sell for 4 years. Next. Released at Yovel. I'm sorry.
Why would that be done as opposed to just being an employee in the same situation?
Because you can get more money, I would think, by selling all of your services. In other words, I don't want an employee. I want someone who's going to work for me, and whatever I tell him to do, he's going to do. I'm willing to pay more for that than I'm willing to pay for someone who's going to be a housekeeper. So therefore, it's beneficial to the person purchasing the services to have someone like that. Now we'll talk about what it means for the person who's doing it in just a moment. But that's why I think you would purchase an Eved Ivri. It's someone that'll do everything you want. Right. Next.
You don't realize how many Abdei Ivri there are in the corporate world, where they work in the corporate world, and whatever they produce belongs to the boss, and they so.
Very, very interesting. She says, just for the, just. All right.
She says, let me tell you something, there are a lot of Americans
that she says that there are a lot of people who are Avodim Ivriim today, where they're working in the corporate world and they have to do their boss's bidding and their produce goes to the boss. Yes, all right. It's interesting. It's correct. But this is, I'm sorry, they're receiving a salary. Well, he receives a bundle of money in the beginning. In other words, when or the money is depending on which of the two cases it is. In one case, it goes back if it's payment of the theft. He can't pay the theft, and in one case, it goes to the slave servant, so that he will be able to care for his family. All right, next. May remain after the 6-year ritual that we dealt with. Treatment is circumscribed. Very clearly, the rabbis say, and this is a powerful statement, anyone who purchases an Eved Ivri, it is as if he has purchased a master. You have to be so caring of this Eved Ivri that you've got to give him to eat before you give your family to eat. In other words, the treatment of the Eved Ivri has to be so compassionate that that it's as if you have become the Eved, right?
If you have a pillow, one pillow, you have to give it to him. Right?
That's correct. If you have one pillow, you have to give it to him. If you have one bed, you have to give it to him.
You have
Yes.
to feed the dog.
What?
You even have to feed the dog before you.
You even have to feed the dogs before you eat. All right, that's interesting. All right, that's another halacha. That's very good. All right, but so the treatment of an Eved Ivri is clearly circumscribed in the Torah, and it must be compassionate. It must be what's the word? It must be acceptable. Acceptable. Next. Yes.
What is the proportion of the money that the owner keeps and the money that is given
To the servant.
so that he can take care of his family?
It's a very good question. I would think that, and someone asked me just before we began, is when you say that someone becomes an Eved Ivri when he can't pay back his theft, is that the same if someone steals $1 or someone steals $10 or $100? In other words, they're going to. So the answer seems to be, I think, any theft that you can't pay back. In other words, even if it's $1, if you can't pay that back and you stole it, then the court has the right to make you an Eved Ivri. Right, but I'm not sure. I have to check that. But that's what I think.
And does the duration of the abdut vary?
We'll get to that in a minute. All right. Next, yes.
So how does the servant pay back his debt, or just take his?
Okay, so in the circumstances where he is sold as an Eved Ivri by the court, unless there's overage, extra money beyond the value of the theft, basically it goes to pay his debt. If he sells himself because he's so poor that he can't survive, then all the money that comes to him comes to him. In other words, if he sells his services to someone for $1,000, he gets the $1,000. That's his. So in that case, you're bringing someone up from poverty. In the case of the thief, you're not necessarily dealing with someone who's impoverished. You're dealing with someone who stole. Let's go on, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, to your question, may designate a Canaanite maidservant. This is tough. To serve as a concubine, you can, if whether the On page number 5, number 8.
Okay, 'cause you-
Number 8. Whether or not the slave is a servant. The servant is married. Family comes with him and leaves with him. The family he brings in leaves with him. But the owner has the right to give him a shifcha knanit as a concubine, and the progeny which results from that particular relationship stays with the master. We're going to have to see why that is in a moment. 9. This is important. May purchase freedom by paying the balance. In other words, if I'm an Eved Ivri and I win the lottery or something happens and I worked already for 4 years, and then 2 years worth I'll pay off and I can get out. So in other words, you're not locked in if you have the ability to pay. And finally, only males. The halachot that we're talking about here are only males. This is avodim ivriim. Now, just to talk about this in a global sense, what happened to people in Britain or in other countries when they stole and couldn't pay back?
Debtor's prison.
They were thrown into debtor's prison, right? And had no way to earn anything to pay back. So it didn't matter what you stole, you were just going to rot there, basically, right? Or be sent to the colonies and work there. Australia as well. Sorry? America as well. Correct. America as well. Correct. What happens to thieves in our society? They're thrown into jail. Is jail rehabilitative? Right? What happens to the thief? The thief becomes a better thief by being in jail, right? In other words, the people he's associating with are all there for a reason, some of them for reasons that are stronger than his. And so we've learned that prison is not rehabilitative, but we haven't solved that problem. It's punitive. It's punitive, correct. But when he gets out, he's still the same person that he was when he came in, unless some cases they better themselves or whatever. But generally, it's not. What? I'm sorry? Right, I was just going to say some, but it's the exception rather than the rule. You're right, 100%. Not every individual who is imprisoned is equal. There are those who manage to get college degrees. There are those who manage to I think, even law degrees. But as a concept, as an institution, prison is not rehabilitative. What's the alternative? The alternative is Eved Ivri. Well, the alternative is Eved Ivri. Why? What are you doing? You're taking an individual who either has stolen or has not worked out how he's going to supply for his family. You are placing him into a family situation. Hopefully that family is a good family. But we have no control over that, but hopefully it's a solid family. And this individual is then in an atmosphere of a family that is succeeding as opposed to failing. And this individual looks and sees how the kids are treated, how this is happening, how that's happening. So hopefully by the end, and his debt is paid back, so he doesn't have that hanging over his head if he's a thief. And what you've done is you put him into a rehabilitative process, location. That's the classical concern. That's what the hope is. That what you're doing is you're putting him into a situation that will allow for change, learning, and the ability as an institution, as opposed to the exceptions. Yes?
You mentioned how
Right.
because it's so difficult to be an Adam. Wouldn't that sort of help sheet, what you were describing, that the family is going into is a very ethical family.
Right.
The person wants to help other people.
Very good.
It's
All right, very,
behaves
okay, very possible. Very possible that the fact that you have to treat the slave with compassion is an indication, and the family's willing to do that, it's an indication that this is a healthy family that you're going into. I'm sorry? All right, now let's talk about the shifcha. All right, let's talk about that. That's the most difficult halacha that we deal with when we talk about Eved Ivri. And I'll explain it the way I understand it, but it's not totally comfortable for me. And that is the following. One of the things a slave has to learn is that because of his or actions or inactions, nothing belongs to him. Everything he produces goes to someone else. And that extends even to the children that are a result of this union between the shifcha and the slave. And it's hard. I don't have on a personal level, in terms of, it's hard for me to understand, but I think that's what the Torah is doing. The Torah is saying everything you create within that period of time, you has to go elsewhere, and you're going to learn that what it's like not to be able to own something, because when you get out, you don't want to be back in the same situation.
Does the slave have a right to approve or disapprove of the shifcha?
According to the law, I don't think so. Does a slave have a right to approve or disapprove of the shifcha? Yes.
There's also another angle.
Okay.
In what happens to the progeny of the
Right.
slave and the shifcha. The Torah has mandated that the owner, the family, take care of.
Well, that's correct. Those children remain in the care of the father, the care of the owner. Correct. As I said, it's a difficult concept, but there are aspects that are understandable. Next, Amma Ivriya. This one's tough, right? We said a girl is sold, again, not as a slave. We're changing our words now. As a maidservant, as a servant to so-and-so, who purchases her to do whatever he wants. Again, as he would if he if he purchased an Eved Ivri. At the end of a 6-year tenure, Yovel or payment, she's free. She gets out. What? Jewish. Yes. If she reaches freedom, if she reaches its maturity during the tenure, master must offer her betrothal to himself or to his son. Has to offer that. Why? Because that's what the Torah says. And I'll tell you why in a minute. All right? According to the Rambam and others, this betrothal must be entered into only with the amaz, the servant's free choice. In other words, she has a right to say, according to many commentaries and I don't want to marry that guy. The money paid for the original sale, if she marries him, is considered the kesef kedushin. What do you mean by that? When there's a marriage, there are two different rituals that take place under the chuppah. The first is kedushin. The second is erusin. Kedushin is really a contractual issue. The chassan is giving something of value to the woman, and the woman is returning something of infinitely greater value to him, which is to be his wife. That's a contract. That's a contract. In this case, the original payment for her services serves as a kesef kedushin. So you don't have to purchase a ring, you don't have to give anything else, etc., etc.
But that went to her father.
What?
That money went to her father.
It went to her father, but nonetheless, it serves as a kesef kedushin. Okay, now let's go, and I want to leave time for this. Now let's go to the most difficult. Let's go to a Eved Kanani. Okay, so number one, we're going to encounter real problems here, and hopefully we'll come up with some answers. An Eved Kanani is physically owned. You don't own his services, you own him. He is, at the base level, he's property. Next, can be bought or sold from household to household, and is bequeathed upon the master's death to the master's heirs. Right? In other words, remains the property either of someone else or the children of the master. May be assigned any work and may be physically disciplined. All right. Unlike an Eved Ivri, you can discipline the Eved Kanani, and that means even physically. Numerous authorities, however, record ethical obligations to treat humanely, provide with every type of food available to other members of the household, feed them before family members, not just avodim ivriim, right? And refrain from embarrassing and insulting. Yes.
Is this also the institution of Eved Kanani cancelled at the same time as Eved Ivri or not?
Yes. Yes. In other words, all these, though, as we were going to get to that at the end, but these institutions were canceled at the end of when Yovel stopped. And basically at that point, you lost the ability to have avodim at that point. Next, upon acquiring a non-Hebrew slave. Now this is really the clincher that will ultimately help us understand. A master must present the slave with the choice of entering Jewish society, l'shem avdus. In other words, if I'm the owner, I have to present this person with the possibility, their choice, of entering Judaism and the Jewish nation at the level of an Eved Kanani. And if the slave agrees, she then undergoes a conversion process consisting of the same rituals found in a full conversion to Judaism. Has to go through gerus. This conversion raises the slave to the official status of Eved Kanani and obligates her, to all positive non-time-bound commandments and to all negative commandments of Jewish law. In other words, the Eved Kanani has the obligations of a woman. All right, basically,
So why doesn't he become an Eved Ivri if he was Medaya?
because he's not an Eved Ivri. This is the point. You are creating a new institution here, which is a societal subsection of your society, where there are these avodim who are not full Jews, but they're not Jews. All right, and we have to try to figure out why this is happening. But that you have to give them the choice. If the slave refuses to undergo this conversion, he may remain in the Israelite household for 12 months in the hope that he will recognize during that time the benefits of entering into the covenant with God. If after that period he still refuses to convert, he is sold back out of the Jewish community. Some authorities maintain that if the slave initially agrees of his own accord to enter the Jewish household, but forego conversion, he may do so. Not everybody agrees with that. In other words, not everyone agrees that you can keep avodim knanim if they say to you, I don't want to go through this conversion. Next, one is forbidden in the normal course of events. Yes. We're not forcing.
But you're even encouraging. We're not supposed to encourage people.
Well, the answer is there. In the case of Eved Kanani, which is not full Jewishness, this is how you enter. You enter in when you are in a position where you were sold as a slave and you have the opportunity to join.
Okay, so with Ruth and Orpah, they say that if you say that they converted, there's enough locus on that.
Right.
So then they say that it was if they converted to marry Machlon and Chilion.
Right.
Then after the death of Machlon and Chilion, only if they re-accepted.
Okay.
Yahadus
All right.
was the
What you're
conversion.
saying, all right, let's the question is being raised. I'll just talk about it for a minute. The question is being raised that this seems to go against the way we treat conversion generally. We don't encourage people to convert, and she brings the case of ARPA, right, and basically says that the Mefarshim say that if they converted for marriage, they would have to go through another conversion. So, without getting involved in the fact that today most converts convert for marriage, all right, and the rabbi's job is to determine and define and make them say that they will keep it even if they do not have to go through another conversion, all right. But the fact is that this slave is in a different position. This is a different situation. This is a situation where he is not becoming a full Jew. He's becoming an Eved Kanani. That's the point. Neither a Ger Toshav nor a Ger Tzedek. He is an Eved Ivri, an Eved Kanani. It's a different status. It's a different place. Yes.
Does this status enter into a regular marriage? Is this like the status of Mamzer, that he just stays in his own status?
All right. The
Like
question is
why-
raised. What about marriage, etc.? He can marry another slave, right?
So it's
Someone
like a
from
Mamzer.
the same population that he belongs to. What? Their children remain Avodim. Their children remain Eved Kanani.
So
Next.
you're kind of like creating a caste system.
You are. Next. One is forbidden in the normal course of events to free his Avodim Kananim. Exceptions to this rule are made, however, under certain conditions. Upon attaining freedom, an Eved Kanani, through an additional abridged conversion process, becomes a full Jew. All right? Can become a full Jew. Next. What? Without it, he remains as an, he goes free if you free him, which is rare. Under those conditions, he becomes a free Eved Kanani. But he stays as he is unless he goes through an additional conversion, but abridged. Yes.
What would be the exception that would enable us?
There are some indications that certain Chachamim in the Gemara allowed a slave to go free when the slave proved himself to be, and when you needed to tenth for a minion. All right, but the idea being, if you really believe that this person deserves freedom, there may be a way to do it. Yes.
You just said you could go under an additional conversion. Did I understand correctly?
If he's freed and he wants to become fully Jewish, as opposed to an Eved Kanani, there's an abridged conversion process, not the total conversion, that he has to go through to move from Eved Kanani to full Jew.
Sorry to be thick. I don't want to waste people's time, but I don't get it. He just went through a conversion, but he's not.
That's correct. He's not Jewish. He is an Eved Kanani. I'm going to get, all right, stay with me. All right, stay with me, because hopefully it's going to make sense when we finish. And what? Does he have a bris? Yes. An Eved Kanani is granted automatic freedom when the owner, upon sustaining deliberate injury causing loss of a limb. That's the pasuk that said if you knock out a tooth, the Eved goes free. That's an Eved Kanani. Capital punishment is meted out to a master who directly causes the death of his Eved. In other words, you are responsible. You're not given license to mistreat these people. You have to treat them humanely. And turn to the next page. You'll see that even more clearly. Yes. The Eved goes free. Oh no, of course it's the death. I'm sorry. My mistake. the Eved's no longer alive. The death penalty is meted out to the master. That's the point. That's where the Torah said, "Nakom ye nakem," a vengeance will be earned or whatever, if a master directly kills a slave and that slave dies within a few day period of time, then the master is sentenced to death.
How about if it's an accident?
If it's an accident, that's does he go to a near miklat? No. But if he knocks out the slave's tooth, right. Now, a series of additional rights and privileges. Page number 7. An Eved Knani who wishes to move to the land of Israel, this is interesting, can force his master to do so or sell the Eved to someone else who will. Right? Right? So Aliyah can be mandated by the Eved Knani. A Jew living in the land of Israel who wishes to move to the diaspora cannot force the Eved Knani to come with him. An Eved Knani who flees from the diaspora to Israel, and that's that pasuk that said you can't return the slave to his owner, right? Under those conditions, may not be returned to his master in the diaspora. In other words, you cannot, if the slave escapes, comes to Israel, you don't give him back. Right. Next. If a Jew living in the land of Israel sells his Eved Knani, a Jew is forbidden to sell his Eved Knani to a non-Jew. If he does, he must pay up to 10 times the slave's value to redeem him. And the slave earns automatic freedom. Wow. If a Jew living in the land of Israel sells his Eved Knani to another Jew living in the diaspora, the second master is forced to grant the slave immediate freedom. All right, now let's talk about what's going on here, because I see the discomfort in the fact that we're creating, as you said, a caste system. These laws are given in a world where you are surrounded by slavery, right? And the slaves that surround you, how are they being treated? Very poorly, right? There's none of these laws apply. They can be killed. They can whatever you want to do with the slave. The slave is a chattel. What does the Torah? What does the Torah do? Yeah. What does the Torah do when confronted with this phenomenon? Well, what we would like it to do is say slavery should be abolished. But on a practical level, what am I going to do? Go to the Romans and say, I abolish your slaves? It can't be done, right? In other words, on a practical level, you're not giving me anything. You're basically saying you shouldn't have slaves, you shouldn't have slavery, but I'm not helping that person in any way. Or the Torah could say, instead of allowing them to wallow in that misery, you can bring them into your society in a very determined way, raise their spiritual status partially, and put them in a position where they're going to live a life that's not the life that they've been leading until now. Converting to Eved Knani. Right. All right. Now, what we're doing now, why? So the big question is, why are we creating a caste society? Why are we? So here, here I'm going to suggest. Help to the what? Right, that's what we're doing. We're raising the Eved status and gaining and the only way that's going to work is you have to allow for people to purchase these avodim. In other words, you can't if you said, if your halacha was set the slaves free, you can, or even you can't purchase a slave because it's not right, then you're condemning them to remain where they are. Yes.
Don't get involved with the commandment. Don't get involved.
All right. So you're right.
And so why are there even all these laws? Get rid of
Get your-
Don't have them around.
but the answer
Throw them
is,
out.
I guess the Torah knows that we're not going to get rid of them entirely.
So
And
you want them in your house?
but
So you
these
want
are
them-
people.
you
These are
want them in
people.
your family?
Well,
You want
that's
them in your house?
that's the answer. The answer is now. Why do we treat them as Eved a Kanani and not as a full Jew? Because if you do, you are bringing in a whole slew of aliens into your society, telling them that they are fully citizens in your society, and you're setting the stage for a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but it's slavery in America, okay?
Slavery in America, yes.
So in the 60s, they were basically in the south of the United States of America. They were basically slaves.
Right.
So it was now they were given more opportunity to get out of being a slave.
Right.
And I still I'm here living too long to be exactly on it. But it hasn't seemed once they were given more freedom, it didn't seem that they were able to integrate
Okay.
into the
You're saying
democratic freedom
100%.
American life.
America made a major, the United States made a major mistake.
It was only till the
When it
60s.
freed the slaves, it did not give them the tools to succeed as free people. And because of that, because there was no path to succeed, we continue to feel the results of that decision. But it's a problem. It's a problem. This is different. This is different. What we're saying is, you're bringing someone in, and you're saying don't free them, because if you free them, you're taking those aliens and you're putting them back out into the society. What you're doing is you're giving the slave choices, something that is unheard of when you talk about slavery in any other tradition. Slave has a choice to remain with you or not to. Slave has a choice to convert to this level of Judaism or not to. And that will be their level until such time as somehow they become free, which may or doesn't, it's supposed to not occur, but exceptions were made, and then they could convert to full Judaism. But otherwise, they remain where they are. And this, I think, is the Torah's way of dealing with a concept that it doesn't like, that Hashem doesn't want to exist, but wants his people to be able to, on a practical level, given the existence of the concept, do something positive. And the whole point of the conversion to Eved Ivri is that. That's the proof. That's the proof. The proof is you can't keep that slave with you if he doesn't want to be there. And you cannot force him to become an Eved Kanani. You give them the choice, and then they decide. Yes.
You're also dealing with a society where, in those days, if somebody stole, they simply cut off a limb.
Right.
So
right.
what's more preferable?
Right.
You know,
Well,
you're
that's
dealing with
correct.
A very heartless society.
Correct.
that,
Which
you know,
correct. So therefore, we're talking about, it seems to me, a practical way of dealing with a difficult situation. When the time comes, by the way, and this was mentioned before, when the time comes that the world no longer has, or the world around us no longer has slavery, then this will be abolished. Which raises a very interesting question, which is what I want to leave you with by exploring just a bit, but it's a longer discussion. What is the relationship in the Torah, the eternal Torah, with the environment in which it is given? In other words, what is the Torah at all directed to the people who it's directed to, those individuals who are living in that society and at that time? Or is it everything in it eternal? And this is proof that the first is correct. Because by abolishing slavery, you're abolishing something that Torah allows. And therefore, once you abolish it, you're saying it only existed. I'll give you another proof. Another proof is Rabbi Gershom's decision against polygamy. Polygamy was allowed in the Torah. Rabbi Gershom said, I'm going to make a takana. You can only have one wife. Because society around us, that's the norm. we can't be different in that way, and we're going to. So the answer seems to be that the Torah, it really unfolds on two levels. Everything in it is eternal. Everything in it we can learn lessons from, as we had today. Specific aspects or specific circumstances may be directed to particular times. Yes.
Wondering whether there was any kind of institutionalized, or probably not institutional, but interest in actively trying to raise the moral level of the slaves before they were accepted as.
You're asking what education or raising of the moral, and right, is the answer seems to be that you're hoping that they will learn morality by being in your home, by being in the by even entering into that particular, because we're not making them full Jews, we're not going to mandate the same requirements as we would mandate for full Jews. But we're going to mandate the requirements to create this series of avodim knanim that will exist within my community as with partial citizenship, right? Not total. And somehow by doing that, I'm raising them in every way. Yes.
Isn't there a slight danger? You said that everything in the Torah is eternal, and we understand that. But then the fear of being to change certain laws to fit the times.
All right. You're raising a very good point. I mean, when I say that certain laws may be directed to particular times, you're opening the door for others to say, well, that law was directed to a particular time. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to be cautious.
So what are the rules for that?
The rules for that are, it has to be something like Eved Kanani. It has to be something like polygamy. It has to be something that, but it can't be Shabbos. It can't be Yom Tov. It can't, right? What?
So who decides?
The rabbis.
Okay, so
Rabbinic authority.
okay.
Rabbinic authority.
That's
That is part of the rabbinic authority piece of oral law. That they have the right to determine laws based on Torah law, but also to create new laws. Yes.
If the Eved Ivri, if the whole structure is to be rehabilitated, is the master family, is their moral fiber checked?
Very good question. That's a very good question. I'll repeat it. We said that the purpose of the Eved Ivri is to be a rehabilitative experience for the Eved Ivri, right? Not Tani. We're talking about Ivri now. So she wanted to know, is there a test to determine the moral fiber of the family that's going to purchase the Eved Ivri? I am not aware of any. I think what we're doing is we're hoping that anyone who would want to purchase an Eved Ivri, as we said, and care for that person, is going to bring that person. Look, people end up being au pairs and housekeepers and whatever, and move into family after family. There's no test to determine whether or not they're entering into a positive environment, right? So, yeah.